Hello, everybody. We are live. I'm here with Sarah, and I'm gonna give her a minute in a minute, I'm gonna let her introduce herself, talk about what she does, and then we'll do our conversation as we always do with everybody listening and weighing in as they feel appropriate. As I've noted in the past, sometimes comments don't feed over to the feed. So if you're commenting on one of the social media platforms and we don't respond, it's probably because it just hasn't pushed over into the streaming platform, and we will go back and respond to those afterwards. So fear not if you're trying to interact with us and we're not responding. That's more than likely what's taking place. And I did want to, we were having a little bit of a feedback issue. So if anybody is listening, and hopefully if the comment comes through, if you can let us know if you're getting feedback, because we'll adjust if it's necessary. Because I know that sometimes when the guest doesn't have an earpiece in, it'll pick up the microphone noise. But as long as everybody can hear okay, then we're not even going to worry about that. And we're just going to enjoy the conversation.
Oh, I'm having
So
technical
I don't see
errors
anything.
now.
I will, yeah, see here if anybody's texting me just to let me know, because sometimes people will text. I don't see anybody letting me know that there's an issue. So we're gonna hope that it's all good,
All right.
and we're gonna go ahead and dive in. So Sarah, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell everybody what you do, and then we'll chat.
Awesome. So I'm Sarah Bloom. I'm the owner and creator of Blooming Pottery. And what that is a handcrafted pottery extravaganza. I like to use color and texture to bring joy to the customers. And basically, I make them on the wheel and then I carve them all by hand, glaze them all. I do custom work. I also teach people how to make pottery as well. And really, I just enjoy the whole process. I've been making pottery for about 20 years and selling them for a little bit over a decade. And yeah, so I make them out of my home and then I bring them to different places to get fired. And so it's kind of like a little Dexter's laboratory in my dining room. So there's like plastic on the floor and the walls to make sure it stays nice and clean. But that's just what I got to do for right now. It's my passion. And yeah, I'm just like so happy to be here. I'm so happy that it's so sunny and like grateful for the sun here in New York. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because I love the Four Seasons, but I will say that it's always like right at the end of the prior season. I'm like, okay, I'm ready for the next season. And definitely, even though we had a pretty mild winter here in New York, because Sarah and I are both in New York, it was like, I'm like, okay, I'm ready for there to be less gray and a little more sunlight coming in my window. So I feel you. And it's great. It's like, I don't know where you're at, if it's the same, but it's about 60 at my house right
Yeah,
now. So
same. We opened up all the windows. So nice, bringing the nice fresh air.
fresh air, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, I even do that during the winter sometimes when it's really cold, because the house air gets so stale when everything is all closed up.
for sure.
So let's talk about your pottery. So, a few different questions and things that I want to kind of talk about and let you share about. So, obviously, on your social media platform, and we'll at the end we'll talk about all your socials so people can follow you and connect with you. But you post a lot of these different creations that you make, and it's an art form, but it's an art that also can be used for different purposes, right? Like you create the mug, but it's also art, and it's also got there's the tactile piece to it. And I know that all artists kind of have their own creative journey that they go through where they have those ideas. So I thought maybe you could share with us a little bit about your creative journey for a new design. Is it kind of pops into your head? Do you spend time thinking about things? Do you draw them? Like what happens to kind of get to these really cool and new ideas that you come up with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, what I do is I really want to think about the functionality of what I'm making. So I have like a couple of examples too that like I'm drinking out of one of my cups right here. And so this is the same texture, but in a different firing than like in a mug form, right? So you just add a handle onto it. That's better. It's like reversed.
I know that messes me up too.
And so I really do enjoy carving each one of these by hand. And so I've done this texture for quite a few years, but I have kind of played between two different kinds of textures. Another texture I make has more of a swirl pattern to it. And that really got inspired um, Probably because like it started in college, to be honest with you, and it ended up developing with having animals carved into them. So the inspiration then comes from each individual animal that I'm carving. So I've gone and done some custom work for my friend Bill, and he wanted for his granddaughter. She really likes spiders, which I was really surprised about. So he wanted a candle holder that had a spider carved out to of it, and he also I was just like, oh, not just a spider, but it's got to have the web, right? So the shadows on the walls were just amazing from that particular candle holder, and I never have done the spider web, right? So sometimes the collaboration of the customer, what they want. Gives me some inspiration, making sure that I have those textured pieces for like the pleasure of the user as well. And then sometimes it's just downloads from wherever they come from, right? The universe. Like I have, like speaking of I have this pattern as well. And I've done something similar to this in the past, but not as intense. And I was just like, oh, this would be great as like a fruit bowl, right? Because just a regular bowl, when you put your fruit in it, sometimes the fruit can kind of like mold if it
Yeah.
doesn't have that air. And I was just like, this would be a great pattern for a fruit bowl as well, right? So they just come from all over the place, but it really is the texture and the color that inspires me the most.
That's so cool. And I'm gathering, like I think about when ideas come to me, right? That comes kind of in layers. Like I'll see something and I'll think like that there's an idea forming and then you kind of feel it. Do you sketch stuff out or do you go take clay and start kind of messing
It's
with it
just
first?
it's at this point it's kind of like I just go and my sketch becomes me making it. And that's also why I started making pottery in the beginning, was because I was basically supposed to take an art class in high school, and I knew that I wasn't very good at painting and drawing. So I was just like, well, what else can I do besides photography? And they offered ceramics classes, and like that was a way for me to get myself into sketch mode, I guess you could say. So it's kind of like you work through your piece, and if your piece doesn't work out, then you can just crush it and work all over again. So yeah, I do sketches for commission work so that way the other person can have a visual of what is going to be represented for their work. But other than that, it's just I just go for it.
Yeah, that's so neat. I mean, I think about like I remember when I was in, I don't know what grade I was in, but I know at some point in one of my art classes we did some, very entry level stuff. I think it was like create a bowl, and I mean, it was probably very evident, like in my recollection, that like it had been handmade. There wasn't, it wasn't well done, but the process itself of pressing the clay and doing that and then it going into the kiln and all the different layers and things that happen, it's like very symbolic and very like there's a growth process that takes place, so that when what comes out, regardless of, right, my fairly amateur or immature, maybe even whatever I created, right, like I didn't know what I was doing, I was just kind of forming something, but it was still cool to see the finished product. And then you paint it and you glaze it and all of those different things, and you feel like part of you is in that. So certainly for you, you've got not just the process of actually the shaping it, but also the whole design thing that's going on in your head, and then how it's going to somebody's house and being used. And I want to talk a little bit about, like you mentioned, the cup there and the mug. And we had talked about this another time that we had a conversation, and I've been thinking a lot about that because I think even when I go shopping for a mug, right, and this is just a mug I've had for a long time that I use, and it's got no particular design or pattern on it, but even just the size of it and how the handle fits, right, it's important. If you're, a tea or coffee drinker and are regularly using, say that 5 times fast, regularly using a mug, we tend to want to, we want something that's going to be comfortable, that's going to be convenient for us to use. And at the same time, I also am a tactile person in the sense that, like, if I'm trying to think, sometimes there's different things that I have on my desk that I'll hold and just rub between my fingers. So, what a cool idea if the mug, right, which it's got the warmth to it, you've got your beverage in there, but it's got that tactile thing to it. And so you create that cup and that mug that serves those different purposes. Where did that come from? Like, what gave birth to this idea that I'm going to create something that I can drink with, but that's also going to have a stress relieving, as you kind of explained, a stress relieving quality to it because of the texture?
Yeah. So For me, when I'm making stuff, because I'm physically making them, I am putting my heart and soul in them, and I feel like when somebody is using it, they feel that love, right? So I actually am physically going through the whole process and they're kind of just getting the aftermath of it. But because that texture is so physical, I feel like that ends up like bridging that gap of you get to feel all the hands that actually goes into it. And not to say that people who don't make textured pieces don't have that, because there's also imagery, right? So like you could put an image or a saying on a mug. But for me, the physicality of it, it really does, especially for people who are neurodivergent, it does have some sort of soothing quality to it, especially if like you're used to fidgeting, right? So like I wear a lot of rings, so like I can spin my ring or whatever. But when you're holding a mug, like, and my goal really is to have about 4 fingers in there.
Hmm.
But when you're holding something that also has that texture, and I always have heard the saying of when people go through trauma, they give them coffee or tea just so that way they're holding something warm and it represents a hug. So it's kind of just that extra comfort that goes behind it when you have that textured piece on there, part of it as well.
Right.
So you get both like the physical sensation of a hug, but also the soothing that comes from like feeling something tactile.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, what it's an added dimension, right? Like to your point, and I think
Exactly.
now that you're saying that, like I feel like that was buried somewhere in my brain. I remember hearing something about that, and you
It
see
was
it
like
on
on
TV
an
shows.
NPR thing or something.
Yeah, yeah. Like, and I think even that's kind of our go-to if you are a warm beverage drinker, right? And you're whatever you're experiencing stress or you're having trouble waking up in the morning, you do want that warm cup, and you'll sit with it. And even on like a hot summer day, I still enjoy the feeling of the warmth on my
For
hands.
sure. Or
And
even if you have like I was talking to some of the other artists that are in our mastermind and they were saying you should really focus on people who have arthritis or people who have issues like, Parkinson's or something where it's hard for them to actually hold on to something that's smooth. And I was just
mm,
like, oh, I never even thought about that. Like the disabilities that could be helped by having something that has texture to it.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think too, even if you're busy, right? Like that's the thing too. Even if you're busy, when you're at your desk and you're working, right? Something because obviously you don't want to be spilling stuff all over your computer. So
Yeah,
it sounds silly, but really something that's practical. It's not going to slip out of your hand. Where
for
did
sure.
that specific design pattern come from? Like, how did
Um,
that specific one get created?
I just like I can't even remember that's how long I've been doing it for.
Right.
But when I first showed it, I said, they were like my dragon scale mugs, right? That's really what they're called. And when some people look at them as well, they say that they're mermaid scales. And I was just like, okay, that's interesting. And then someone had commissioned me, one of my friends had commissioned me to make actually a dragon egg. So and I was like, I can't just make an egg. I have to make it functional, right? So it's a jar. And then the way you put it together, there's a little keyhole there. So I just kind of played with it more. The swirl design, which I wish I had a candle holder of the ones that have animal designs in them, but the swirl design really came a little bit later. I think it was just using how do I use the loop tool that I use specifically to do the carvings, but it's like it's been decades that I've been doing it, so I just can't even remember the first time to be
Yeah,
honest with you.
absolutely. But and you do each one of those little pieces one at a
Have
time?
it all,
Yeah.
yeah. And then what ends up happening is the ridges can become really sharp. So then I take a paintbrush and I have to smooth everything over. And sometimes I'll have to even use a little bit of sandpaper just to make sure that I am like after it's completely done, no one can get hurt because that's the downside
Ah,
to ceramics is it's soft and squishy at first, but then after it's been fired, it can be sharp, especially with the glass that's added.
interesting. So you can sand it down after it comes out of the kiln.
The first firing and then also the second firing. Hold on, let me take a little sip of this and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Actually, so there's a couple of different firings. Like I said, I do, but the first one is electric, which you'll see the bottom of this is completely clean there. And then there's soda fired, which we'll ignore the little price tag on there. Like, which way am I going? So you'll see these little dot marks. So this light piece right here, that's all from a wadding. So it sits 1, 2, 3, and then 4. And it'll sit above the kiln's shelf. And basically this goes into what's called a soda fire, which there's other atmospheric firings as well, but this is the one that I particularly like to work with. And the soda fire means that we put it in a gas kiln and we spray baking soda into it. So the baking soda then becomes the glaze. So the gold sheen you're seeing right here is all just baking soda itself. And then when it combines with the glaze, it's going to look different. So some of this looks a little bit peachy pink and some of it looks a little bit blue green. And the same thing with this piece right here. So this is why this one's so special, is because it looks exactly like like I sprayed it on there, but it's not. It's all just from the baking soda interacting with the green glaze, which turns purple. So it's always a surprise with this particular firing. So that's why I love it so much more. And the way you could tell are those little dot marks on the bottom. So it has to sit above the shelf. Otherwise, the baking soda will make it fuse when it gets sprayed onto there versus the electric, which is completely flat.
So I'm actually, so I want to, so if you can shorten, you don't have to give me all, but step by step. So the first thing is you grab a hunk of clay. Let's start with that. You know what you're making. Can you tell me like the process? I would love to hear this.
So basically I have to determine based on how much clay I'm grabbing, what I want to make, right? So if I'm making a cup, there's going to be a little bit smaller of a piece of clay. But so I will wedge it all up, which means that I will have to get all the air out of it. So it's kind of like kneading dough. So we wedge it all up on some plaster, and then you have your ball of clay and you sit on the wheel. Some people won't do the wheel, they'll do hand building. I do hand building as well, but I mostly work on the wheel. So the wheel is just a giant spinning disc, and you throw your clay on there, you add some water, you do some compression, and then basically what you have to do is get it centered. And the reason why you get it centered and the reason why it becomes so therapeutic for people is because it's centering you. Like, you're centering the clay, but you have to be centered yourself to actually get the clay centered. So basically what that means is it doesn't look like it's dancing around on the wheel while it's still spinning. And then you open it up, and then you open the floor. So you open it up with your thumbs. I say that's like a drill. And then you open the floor. It's like the rock hand symbol. So you're pulling towards your belly button, and that's making your floor nice and flat. And then you can do what I call the lobster claw. So it's a little bit of pinching. So you use your thumbs and you pinch with these 4 fingers here, and you're pulling your clay up. And the whole entire time, you got to make sure you're doing the right balance of the wheel spinning and your hands moving at the right speed and a lot of moisture. So once you're done with that, then you have to wait for it to be dry enough to pick it up. And so that means like pick it up and not be able to squish it. So then you turn it upside down, you trim this foot right here so it's flat to begin with. So basically there's a bunch of clay that's about here and it's completely flat on top. So I turn it over, I trim all this, and then I do my carving. And if it's up, I'm going to add a handle. So I have to pull more clay and make this handle, then attach the handle, and then it gets smoothed out. And then I fire it for the first time, and then depending on what's going on, I can sand it after it's fired the first time. So that's what's called bisque. And so that means that it is no longer going to be able to be reclaimed back into clay. So up until that point, everything else can be broken down and reused. But after it's fired the first time, it's taking out all of the moisture and it goes from being clay to ceramic. And then
Does it
once
go in for that? For is
it goes
that
into
goes
a
actually in?
kiln.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so a
Okay.
kiln is just like a giant oven that gets over 2000 degrees. And so that's electric the first time. So both firings can be electric, but the first one for sure is electric for me. So that gets fired to a certain lower temperature. And then we take it out, I'll sand it or whatever else I need to do, wipe it all down, then I mix up the glaze. So the glaze is what you're seeing is the color on here. So this is actually a transition of two different, technically four. So there's one or three, there's one glaze on the inside, and then there's one glaze on the outside here, and then a third glaze on the inside and the outside. So that's French blue on the inside, turquoise and speckled java on the outside. And so what glaze is specifically, it's a mixture of clay particles, colorant, and glass. So basically we mix it all together with water. They're suspended in the water, right? And the water is essentially what is the applicant to your piece, because the
Okay.
bisque will become kind of like a sponge and it'll absorb all that water into it, and then it'll distribute all the little clay particles, which is the glaze, onto the piece. And then once you're done with that, you make sure you wipe up your bottoms. If you don't wipe your bottoms, you got a problem. It'll stick to the shelf. And then you fire it. And like I said, it's either the electric or it could be soda fired with those little dots on the bottom. Basically that goes over 2000 degrees again. And if it's a soda fire, you do that special baking soda process. The baking soda gets also put into some water, and then we put it in a weed sprayer and spray the kiln while it's on fire. So there's like flames shooting at you while with the weed sprayer. It's kind of like a carnival game where you're like trying to shoot the mouth of the clown, but instead you're shooting the pottery. Like you can see them inside, and you're just like looking, and you're like, oh, I want to spray all my stuff nice and good to make sure you get that nice glaze on it. And yeah, that's the most fun and more intensive. There's also wood firing, which means that you're stoking a kiln for about 3 days with wood, and the wood ash becomes the glaze. And it's funny because glaze can literally come from anywhere. Like you can put salt on it, which is like there's also salt firings as well. When we were in college, we played around with a materials class. So basically anything that you could imagine, we threw in the kiln and saw if it made a glaze. So someone put a chicken nugget, like literally from McDonald's, in a little tray, and it made a beautiful glaze because it's covered in salt. So it's just like this green color that came out. It's so weird. You can use, I mean, there's so many different materials that go into glaze, like lots of metals that go into them as well. But like a good combination is really what you're looking for to make sure that your pieces are food safe. So you want to make sure that it doesn't crack or craze or anything.
Oh, gotcha.
Like that. And that means that it's just like, and also it doesn't have heavy metals. Like too much chrome would not be technically food safe. So a lot of really vibrant, like Christmas tree green, that can have a lot of chrome in it, and that's not necessarily food safe. It could be decoration, but not food safe. And then there's also manganese. Back in the day, they used to use lead. Lead was used for everything, right?
Yeah.
But now, like, I just try to make sure that everything that I'm using is technically food safe.
So when you said that Christmas tree green has a lot of I'm sorry, you said what
Chrome.
I forget it, chrome. I thought it chrome, but then I was like, was that what I thought? So it's got a lot of chrome in it. So it's because that's what's used to create that color.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, don't if you go out and you see like, oh, that's green, stay away from it. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is
I know.
The person that's using their glaze, like we had something that was called matcha green, and I just describe it as like how you would think stereotypical Christmas, really, really green, St. Patrick's Day green, whatever green you want to talk about. That was the no glaze for me, at least, unless I was using like a sculptural, like I was making a sculptural piece. Yeah. And then you have to be careful. There's a lot of issues you can have, like airborne issues that you can have. So you have to use the proper like safety PPE so that way you don't have those issues. But yeah, for the most part, I try to be as safe as possible. I'll do like the sanding and stuff like that. That should be done outside instead of indoors because of those tiny little particles. You can
Right.
get what's called silicosis, which is like coal mining disease for your lungs, but potters can get it as well.
Well, and that was going to be one of my questions too, because I'm imagining too, like even just operating a really hot kiln and having to be near that, right? Like you can't just hang out there for like 30 minutes. You've got to like monitor how much am I in the heat and stuff. So, you said it's interesting. You started in high school, right? And I think in high school, at least what I recall of high school ceramics, right? They had like a lot of the stuff, but I don't know that you were learning a broad scope, or did you learn a lot of this in high school, or was it more like you got just enough in high school to be like, this is it, I want to do this, and then you learned a lot of the more complicated stuff in college?
So basically, in high school, it was more of it was an education in that I was actually making the stuff. Some people only
Okay,
get to paint them, right? And so I was never actually operating the kilns themselves. That was
sure,
always the teacher's
sure.
duty. And so I was lucky in the fact that I got to just make the stuff and not have to worry about the firing part of it. And we did a lot of painting on the glazes as opposed to right now I do a lot of dipping, which is like just we used commercial glazes and I make my own. So the commercial glazes are like tiny pint size, and you just take a paintbrush and you make sure you paint like 3 layers. It's a whole thing. But I just never could get away. I actually thought I was going to be a photographer. And I mean, in some senses, I am because you still have to do that for your business, right? And so I decided I was going to go to community college, and I was lucky to still have ceramics class access when I went to community college, even though I was getting my photography degree. And so I just kept taking the classes. And then once I got to a point where the my mentor, her name's Brooke, once she knew that I knew my stuff, like she was just like, oh, you know what you're doing. I don't have to worry about you. She then started to teach me how to make the glazes and how to load the kilns and all that other good stuff. And then by the time I got to my bachelor's degree at New Paltz, that was a little bit more intense. So basically, what I was working with at my community college, Rockland Community College, was electric kilns only, and you have to have a vent. And that I would buy an electric kiln if I had a home. That's like a whole nother step. But it requires at least two like circuit breakers or something like that. So you need an
Okay,
electrician to figure that stuff out. But it also needs a fan to vent it, because the first firing, not so much of a big deal, but that second firing, you can have harsh chemicals come radiate out of the kiln. And so you need that fan going to take them out of your home or wherever you're firing. And so with the gas kilns at New Paltz, those you kind of can have an issue with carbon monoxide. So you have to be careful. You have to realize, like, okay, especially if they're indoors. If they're outdoors, fine, whatever. But if they're indoors, it's a bigger vent, but you don't want to be hanging out for quite some time. So you take
sure.
shifts and you make sure you're checking on things, going in and out of that room. If you're outside with the soda firing that I work with, that is outside. It's not as big of a deal. And the same thing with the wood firings. Those are also outside kilns. So you're not necessarily around it all the time. But if you are doing, like, I like to use like the more updated kilns. If you're doing manual kilns, then you kind of have to turn a knob, even for electric. But the gas ones, you do have to monitor constantly.
Now, so where are the kilns that you use? You just mentioned you would have a kiln. So do you have your own kiln at all, or do you use?
I, well, I will eventually. I will once I buy a home. Right now, I'm renting.
Sure.
So I go over to a place in Rosendale called Women's Studio Workshop. I also
Um,
fire over at the studio that I teach at called Newburgh Pottery. And then the soda firing is up in Germantown, which is the Okie Dokie Studio. and they also have wood firing as well. And then I'm going to be working with Lynn at New Prospect Pottery, and she's actually, I think, out near you.
Yeah, New Prospect is near me.
Yeah. So she does salt firing and wood firing as well.
Yeah, so people who are watching may not know that. So we mentioned that we're both in New York, but we're actually quite close to each other.
Yeah.
And the area that Sarah lives in is a place that's close to my heart. I went to college in New Paltz, excuse me. And I mean, the mountains there are just, in my mind, unparalleled because of just the colors and everything. So, yeah, absolutely. And we plan on doing an in-person thing. Maybe we'll even do it go live when we do that, because I can't wait to come and kind of see all of your stuff displayed.
Sure.
But kind of a logistical question, like I'm picturing now. So you've got all of this stuff that you create. Now you've got to bring it all to the kiln. I mean, like my, project management mind starts thinking about like, how do you separate this stuff to make sure it doesn't break? Like I'm starting to think about that. So I don't know if people that are watching are as interested in some of that type of stuff as I am, but how do you then transport everything to the kiln without, losing pottery?
Yeah. So for a little bit, I did use like newspapers, and I do not recommend them anymore.
Okay, fair enough.
What I recommend is styrofoam pockets. And so basically, I mean, you could buy sheets and make your own, but it was just easier for me to have that styrofoam pocket already, so I could just like slip it right into it and not have to worry about it. A lot of the times when I was using the newspaper, there wasn't as much cushion, and then also if something was glazed, right? The glaze is easily able to like fleck off of there. So basically, if you put any newspaper on the inside of it, as soon as you peel it out, it might pop off the lip, and then you don't have any glaze there. So the styrofoam pockets actually don't really have that problem, even if I do put them over. And then I use cardboard boxes, and we just take a trip and like drive like there's a baby in the back seat,
I might have to go on one of these trips with you. I think I want to do a kiln run with you. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit less fun than you would think, but you're more than welcome to. You can see how
I'll document it.
Yeah, that's fine by me.
I'm thinking back to, I don't know if you watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I know that you're a bit younger than me, but like he used to go to these different places and do these things. And I just think it's fascinating to think about, you go to the store and you buy a product like that's handmade, right? And you see the handmade label on it. And we certainly recognize that handmade label means it wasn't mass produced. There was somebody actually took the time to make that specific piece very carefully. It wasn't just part of a molded thing. But when you think about the amount of time that it actually takes, right? So in general, a lot of handmade products have a higher price tag. They have a higher price tag because of the amount of time and love and that it takes going into creating that, right? Like that mug was created with a piece of love. It's got a little bit of Sarah love in it, right? So when you're holding that mug in your hands, that that process took place. And I think that's why it's kind of fascinating to hear all of those different layers of it, because you could buy cups that are poured into a mold and they go through the process, etc. But each one of your pieces has gone through that entire process, right up to the going in the car and going on a trip to the kiln that then takes place in levels. And so like, do you like drop the stuff off and then you run it and then you take it out? I mean, because it's not like a one day thing. So you've got to like drop it, do the stuff, come back, do it again. Do you, because there's a glazing that goes on in between those two burns, right? So you bring it back to your place and then you bring it back to the kiln again.
Yep, which is why I need to get my own. But yeah, so I the first time around, I'm a little bit more careful about how I'm stacking them on top of each other. Even if I do, like maybe I'll just do one layer and do a bunch of, I'll also take like those Amazon styrofoam, the air pockets, and do like that to make sure that it has a little bit of cushion. But yeah, so I bring it there. I load it all up in the kiln. So the kiln has like several shelves. So you just put pegs in there so that way the kiln shelves will stay at a certain level. So you want to make sure you have like things that are like together, so that way they're all,
Mm,
you're taking up
okay.
the optimization of the kiln. And when it's a bisque fire, you can stack them actually on top of each other because they won't fuse. But with the glaze, they'll fuse because of that glass, right? So
Huh.
I bring it there, load up the kiln, set it to be fired, and then I go home for like a day or two, come back, pick it up, and at that point they're not as fragile. So I can be a little bit more lenient on the packing. And so I'll pack it all up, bring it home, glaze it, and then I will put it in back in those styrofoam pockets and bring it back over there, load it up again, and then come back another day. For the soda fire, I have to bisque fire them first, and then I go over to Germantown and we glaze our stuff there. So he has special
Okay.
glazes for that particular firing, which makes it a little bit easier. It's not a back and forth again for like
Right.
the second time, but I have to then wait at least 3 days because the kiln gets so hot. It's a higher temperature, but basically it needs about like 3 days to cool down. It's also a larger kiln as well. And so then we go back, well, we biscuit, glaze it, put the little wads on, load it into the kiln, and then it gets fired, and then we have to unload and pretty much do the whole process. So the little things that's called wadding, and it's just a mixture of clay, and then I think there's oh, I can't remember I think it's alumina hydrate that's in it as well. And sometimes people will put little bits of wood in there too, especially for a wood kiln because you're trying to add more fuel to like fire to the piece. But basically it becomes refractory. So after it's fired, it becomes really brittle and you can either pull them off or if sometimes they get stuck, like I have vase pieces. This is not soda fired, but like I'll give you the example. These little feet right here, that's where I would
Mm,
put the wadding. But if they get caught on like a lip right here, then it'll be hard for them to come off smoothly. So I have to kind of plan where the wadding goes. Otherwise, I might break the bottom of my piece, which is why I have a reject pile. And so the wadding also and you can use seashells too. That's like a whole nother situation. But basically, it gets soft or like will dissolve if you leave it in water for 24 hours. So that kind of helps with trying to take them off if they don't come off right away.
okay.
But for the most part, they will. It just depends on the shape of your piece.
Yeah. So, all
But
right.
it's a
So I have
long
a few.
process.
It is a long process. It's a cool process. I mean, I think it's one of those it's any creation process and we create things all the time, right? You can be a manager of a company and there's a creation process that's going into what you're doing and how you're delivering your message and your information. But I think the creation process, we learn a lot about ourselves. So one of my questions is like what is something you've learned about yourself through the process of creating pottery? Either it could be long ago, it can be recently, it can be with a specific piece, but what's something that you've learned through that creation process?
Oh, patience for sure. I never thought I would have as much patience as I do. I feel like that's the only thing I have for is
Right.
patience for it. And I think, also creativity as well and problem solving because things don't always go according to plan. And then another, like the last thing I think I would say is that I probably would be really good at like some sort of Tetris situation because in the kiln, like even just like fitting stuff inside of things and like packing the kiln, packing my car, like I'm constantly having to puzzle solve for making sure that everything fits into my station wagon and like the kiln itself. So yeah, it's creative puzzle piece, like 3-dimensional puzzle piece.
Yeah, well, and the patience piece, like you said, because I mean, throughout your entire process, there's a degree of patience that has to go in. And then I can't even imagine the patience it requires to not completely lose it when a piece breaks off of something that just went through, I don't know, 10 hours of work. And now you're like, it's broken. So I love that. I think that that's powerful. And you didn't hesitate. You had that answer, like you had that ready to go. You're like patience and problem solving Tetris. My family jokes when we're packing to go on vacation. We have 3 teenagers, and it's like when you have little kids, you think like, oh, I'm going to pack so much stuff, but when my kids are older, we're not going to bring that much stuff, and it's just different stuff. And so I'm like, they joke that I'm like the Tetris master, because I will find ways. They'll be like, there's no more room in the car. I'm like, wait, we're gonna find it. Everything is fitting in here. So it's a cool process, and it does apply to our lives, right? So many times we have to figure out how to balance. And so when you're making that pottery and you're figuring out, like you said, the same sizes and how are they going to fit, and looking at the long-term planning, which most folks probably would not think of the pottery process as having to do with strategic planning, but it is. Like, what's going to happen when I get to this stage of it? And like the piece you just held up, I mean, I can't even imagine what goes into creating those legs and how those legs are formed. What's one of your favorite? I'm not gonna say favorite because I'm sure there's many. What's one of your favorite pieces you've created?
I think, well, there's favorite and then there's easiest.
Fair enough. So you can do both.
So my favorite, I think, are the dragon eggs, just because they're so fun and they always like surprise people, right?
Yeah.
And then the easiest for me would probably be a bowl, which is like probably what I would like. If I could make bowls all day, I'll make bowls all day. But between that and like the candle holders, like those are really my favorite. And the mugs always sell, just because they're just so useful and an everyday item. And yeah, it's just it's just cathartic to sit there and just go to town. I listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm making this stuff too. But the dragon eggs and the candle holders are a little bit more complicated. So,
well, and here as a pitch for you, I would say too, spring is coming, right? Spring,
yes.
Whether you celebrate Easter or just in general, the spring season. So while they are dragon eggs, but really just the egg in general, what a cool idea to give somebody a gift, and you could put a note inside of there, or, piece of jewelry inside of there, whatever you could nest it inside of that egg, because you can't even tell that it opens up, and then it opens up, which is just like, hey, here's a message to everybody. Like sometimes you feel like you're all packed and tight there, but like open up your gifts and let them shine. So I think there's so many things that could be done with that egg. So even though its an original intent was for that dragon egg, it certainly has multi-purposes. And then I'm excited because I'm definitely going to at some point pick out the kind of mug I want. I mean, I definitely since you showed it to me, I don't know how long ago that was. It was a few months ago, right? When we talked.
When we first talked, yeah, that was a couple months.
Yeah. So like but now I'm like, I can feel it. Yeah, like I can. Oh yeah, right. I felt it in Florida, right? So I just imagine what it's gonna feel like when I can sit. My family's gonna find me curled up in my office with my mug. And I think that would be fun to do. We'll have to strategize out how that would work, but to do a field trip and maybe either turn it into a whole little video of little clips throughout the day, or maybe some of it we'll even do live. But I think, and for folks to be able to see all of your pottery, which they certainly can on your social media, which is why now I do want to give everybody an opportunity to find out where they can connect with you, where they can see your other work. So whichever is the best method, or all of the methods that people can connect with you, let people know.
Yeah.
Where to go and see you.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Blooming Pottery. And then I'm also on TikTok, blooming.pottery. And I'm on Etsy. If you type in Blooming Pottery on the search engine, that'll come up. And also on Facebook, I have a business page. And then my personal page is Sarah Ann. So you can find me either one.
And they could come and get and then you go to various fairs and stuff as well,
yes.
Right?
I just had my first show of the season in Morristown, and then the next one is going to be Lyndhurst, which is on May 3rd through 5th.
Okay.
So that's in Westchester. And that was a really good show last year. I enjoyed it. The grounds are beautiful. I don't know if you've ever been to that mansion or not, but like it's a beautiful park. It's right in like Terrytown, so it's a really good space. And then I'm trying to make sure that I'm posting more regularly on when I'm going to be at these shows. So I'm also developing an email list. So if you ever want to be on the email list, just send me a message and I'll add you to it.
That's excellent. And do you ship, or do people have to come and buy
I
in person?
do, yes. So you can see in person, but a lot of my stuff is in person, and I can do any custom, like you were saying, like you wanted to have for yourself. And I would just like to say, like, don't think of like handmade pieces as every single piece is going to be exactly the same, right? So you can have fun with it, right? You can say like I can have one that's like this color scheme, but then I can also have a purple and blue one, right? And they'll all match because of the texture of it. And then each person in your home can have their favorite, right? And yeah, you can see them in person, or you can order custom work on my Etsy, or like I said, just send me a message and we'll work out the details. So all over the place. I've international at this point. So
Yay, excellent. All
yay.
right. And then last thing, parting message for everybody. I know that I just talked a lot. I got it pulled a lot out because it was like you were telling stories and I was like, "Oh, tell me more. I want to hear what happens to it next." But what is a message that you'd like to send to everybody closing as we close out this discussion?
Ooh, that's a tough question, Deb. What's a message? Um,
It could be a lesson you learned. Yeah, don't feel like you're, it's
I'm
really
just
open, something
thinking,
that
right,
matters to
right,
you.
right, right. I think, I think really the message that should be is if you're thinking about taking any sort of art class, whether or not it be pottery or anything else, anything to get your creative juices flowing, go for it. I always encourage everybody to try it because you do need a creative outlets. I even as an artist need my own hobbies, my own creative outlets. So I can only imagine people who aren't doing this every day, and what their needs are. So I just encourage you to take any class and learn.
Excellent. I love that. I think you're absolutely right. Any type of creative thing that you can do. And I think sometimes people, I've said this before on other discussions, but sometimes people label themselves as not creative because they've got in this very fixed version, right? Like you could have fallen into like, well, I'm not a fantastic painter, so therefore I'm not an artist, right? But there's so many ways that we can explore our creativity, and it's just good in general. It's healing. It helps us to find out things about ourselves that we might not have even realized were underneath
For
there. So I think
sure.
that's a fantastic message for people to go out there and find what they're interested in and explore it and learn it.
And don't be a don't be a perfectionist about it because you're learning, right? So it's just like music. You got to practice, practice, practice.
Right.
Don't freak out if it doesn't work out at first.
Yeah. Absolutely. Get in it for the patience, right?
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate you taking time out of this. We're definitely going to have some additional time together, which is going to be exciting because especially since we're so geographically close to one another. But I really appreciate you taking the time and answering all those questions patiently and giving me the whole breakdown of it. I think that it's just fascinating, the life of the life of a mug or a vase, like from start to finish. So we appreciate you very much, and thank everybody for joining us, whether
Yeah,
it's
thank
live or after the
you.
fact. Let me let you, if you want to say goodbye to everyone before we
Oh
sign
yeah,
off.
well, thank you all for joining, and just remember, like, if you're finding me on any sort of platform, I'm there to help you teach. So feel free to. I'm there to help you learn. I love teaching, and so feel free to ask any questions. I'm always down for questions.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Sarah. Really
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Deb. Thank you for having me. I'm so glad I had the opportunity to come on here.
It was awesome. All right. Great. All right.
Have a
We're
good rest
signing
of your
off,
day.
everybody.
Bye.